Hello YouTube, it's Accurate. So let's teach Loopop a little bit of scratching, right?
Hi. So Native Instruments invited a few other creators and me to Berlin to celebrate 10 years for Machine. With such talent around, it's a good opportunity to learn a thing or two. And see a few sights. One of the things that always interested me, aside from Datsun's finger drumming style, is Accurate Beats' scratching style. It's kind of chill and not excessive. So I asked him to show me the ropes and he agreed. So we're here with Accurate Beats. We're only seeing our hands, but prove that you're accurate.
That's true, that's me. With the tattoos and stuff.
So what we want to do here is learn about scratching from you and your style. Let's start from as basic as possible and then hopefully build up from there.
Cool. So, I mean, as basic as possible, to me, scratching is just manipulating sounds over time. Normally, I use these kind of standard average scratch samples that are like one-shot samples. Noises and small short sentences are just noises. And when you move the platter back and forth in different tempos and different directions, it creates other types of sounds. And the fader is pretty much just an on and off switch.
Yep. Like when you scratched, how do you choose the samples that you use to scratch? Is it just the sort of the standard scratching sounds, or do you have your own samples that you scratch on?
I do a little bit of both, but for my normal YouTube videos, I normally just go for the average classic samples that everyone knows. So when you think about what is a scratch sample, yeah, those are pretty much the ones that I use.
And in terms of the turntable, obviously we're not using a real record here. We're using Traktor.
Yep.
So the setup that we have it's in turntable mode. Right?
It is.
And then the only thing I think that needs to be set up is the switch here.
So this is called the fader curve. You can have a long or a short one.
Cool.
And this is kind of an immediate one. So as soon as you hit it like a millimeter or two, you get the full volume.
This is off, right? So if we turn this just a little bit, we hear it. But all the way to the right, we can't hear anything.
No. So it goes to full volume immediately. So if this is the on and off thing, where you just go from no sound to all of the sound, the speed and the direction of the platter is what actually makes what the sound sounds like. This is if the sound sounds, if it makes a noise, and this is what kind of noise it makes. And this is where it helps a little bit to have a real turntable with a big platter, because the slow moves comes through way easier on a big platter because you have a bigger distance between the center and the corner of the record.
So let's make this the little versus portion of the video. Like, how does this compare? How does this experience compare? All the bad stuff, all the good stuff.
Cool.
So we saw the good stuff with the cue points.
Yeah,
but sort of what are the ways that this compares to a real turntable?
What's a little bit unique with this controller compared to other controllers first is that the wheels are motorized, so it spins, which makes it feel like a turntable. You can actually catch it physically without it just being a platter that you move yourself. That's a big difference. So This is kind of similar to a proper turntable setup, but the size of the platter or the wheel or whatever you want to call it makes a big difference. In this case, making like quick moves on the platter is easier than on a normal turntable. But doing the more slow, more precise, slowed down effects is a bit harder.
Because it's better to be further from the center.
Right.
Cool.
You have a bigger platter to move, and it's easier to be like accurate with how.
And you want to be accurate, of course.
Of course I do. Yeah.
Any other pros and cons or things sort of?
Yeah, I mean, this is way better for like club DJs who goes out to a club one night and to another club the other night, because it's not sensitive to shakes or stuff like that. If you have a real turntable with a needle and the environment is shaky and the bass frequencies makes it all bounce, you're introducing a whole world of problems there. So this is way easier for a DJ like that as well.
I'm curious, there's something that I noticed here, that when you turn this platter on the top, it's sort of smooth, but when you do it from the side when it's playing, it like gives you more friction. Is that something you ever use? Like, it's really odd. It's harder to turn from here than it is here. Is that relevant for you, or like for scratching?
It could be. I don't use it like that because I'm just using the platter because I'm coming from this turntable background, and you don't have a thing like that. But there's also, now we're in the turntable mode. If we leave the turntable mode, you have one function here. You can have the scratch function on the platter and this shift function, like plus and minus in BPM, with this thing right here.
But you don't use that for scratching. It's more for DJing. Or...
It's more of a DJ thing when you're trying to match up the BPMs and stuff like that. The speed of the platter corresponds to the pitch of the sound. That makes sense, right?
So it works. So it's similar to a turntable, I guess, in that.
No,
respect.
it's the same.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same. But I'm just thinking in scratching in general, you should know that, and you should take that into consideration, because sometimes you see DJs doing stuff and they just really fast with both the hands. It's very quickly everything. Might be it looks cool and it looks impressive, but it becomes less musical to me.
Do you is that something you take into consideration, the pitch of do you match the pitch of the sample to the pitch of the track?
No. It's more like if you have a sample like this, if I'm quick on the platter, you get this really high pitched sound, right? But if you're slower, it's a totally different sound. And when you use the fader to cut in and cut out, you want to have a little bit of variation here. The high-pitched sound, the low-pitched sound, playing it forward, playing it backward, and that's what makes it musical to me, that you're able to do this in different notes. Like the same, I like to think of it as like this big djembe drum or whatever, that you have different ways to play it and different pitches to go to, not just how hard you hit it. And that's kind of similar to this, because I think of scratching as more something I add on top of a beat that I make to make it more interesting, to give the whole track another dimension of something happening that is more dynamic than the track itself is. So the basics, normally, when you learn how to scratch, you're always talking about the baby scratch as the first thing you do. And that is just moving the platter back and forth in different tempos, different speeds, without using the fader. So just having the fader open, which means we create the sound. Then you manipulate it with your hand, normally a big turntable, in this case, this one. As it spins, you stop it, you pick it up, you move it back and forth to create different sounds.
Now, I've seen some scratch videos, they mark the beginning of the sample with tape or something. Here, obviously, it's not relevant. So you use the light to figure out where you are?
Yeah, but when you've done this for a while, it's in your hands.
Okay.
You don't even think about the light, and you don't need much of a marker or anything. You just know if the sample is this long, I'm releasing it and I'm pushing it back this much.
Can you do something musically just with a baby scratch?
You definitely can. If you have this long sentence thing you want to scratch and just using baby scratch, you're getting into a kind of a rough patch, because when you release the sample and you're letting it play for like 2 seconds, then you have to get back to the start again. So reversing the platter for 2 seconds is going to be very noticeable, and that's not a nice sound to have in there. No, but if you have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then you want to go back to scratch the A, you have to go through all of the samples. You have to go
with the baby scratch.
Yes.
So that's where you'd use the fader.
Yeah, that's where you take the sounds out of there, so you can move it back.
Yep.
And then.
Do you ever use the cue points here, like as a?
Definitely. If I have different points in the sample that I know this is a sample and that's another sample, you can use these.
This is sort of like an advantage for Traktor compared to
definitely,
vinyl.
yeah. When you're using like a normal turntable, that's not an option. Okay, so the baby scratch, for that we just leave the fader open, so we have the sound that we want to hear all the time. We're just using one single hand on the platter. We have to start it up. And that's the sample. So in order to scratch it, I want to get back to the beginning of it, like that, which also is a scratch sound, depending on how you view it. If I'm here and I want to go back, but keep it musical and fit to the music, I have the option to go and cheat my way through it a little bit. That's what you normally want to do with the fader, that you want to stop the sound, but if I just hold the platter, it becomes silent. So if I'm at the end of the sample, it becomes 3 different sounds instead of just this big
good without touching the fader, which is sort of good to
so
start
we're still
with.
in the baby scratch territory. But what you normally do to practice in the beginning is just to hold the tempo and to be able to match the beat. So you do things like which isn't super musical to me. But that's what you normally try to do. Or you go... and trying to keep track of the tempo.
Cool. So let's try these two moves in a musical context.
So we need a beat for that.
Yep. And then let's try it with you with sort of scratching and leaving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the one.
And then presumably you do it at faster intervals
Yeah.
and interchange them. Nice. Cool. Nice.
So that makes it noticeable, the thing that I'm talking about. When I want to go to the beginning of the sample, I get this really big that noise. A lot of the times you want to cut that noise up with the fader or just try to hide it somehow. But using baby scratch like this, you can get even more advanced with it and stopping more rhythmically and be like super precise with it. But I'm not the best guy in the world with this, so...
Before we move to the fader, do you think there's anything we should know that can be used without the fader?
Yeah, in this case with Traktor, since you have these cue points that you can use, of course I can just cue it up and get a cue point on one of the pads at the start of the sample, so I can sheet my way to the beginning of the sample when I have released it, so I don't need this big obnoxious backward sound. That's an option for this, but with normal regular vinyl, that's not possible. But that's also a good way to like start using it if you're having something like Traktor.
So could you maybe show us sort of jumping around between samples using cue points?
Sure.
Yeah.
There's there.
Oh yeah.
Little something like this.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Sure. Without using the fader still?
Yes,
Cool.
if possible.
Yeah, it should be.
So let's check out multiple cue points and how that works with scratching without a fader.
Cool.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I like this.
Check this out.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Nice. All right, so let's move on to using the fader.
Yeah, so again, the fader is pretty much just an on and off switch for the sound. So when you've done this for a while with the baby scratch, you realize I don't want this sound to be in here, or I want this sound to be cut up, or whatever. And to me, it doesn't really matter how you do it or what you do. The important thing is that it fits together with the music and it makes sense for you. So in that case, I would take something like
Oh my God.
the Oh My God sample and maybe stop the fader and go back to O and then release it again and then go back to the next word and the next word after
So
that.
how would you know to navigate the words? That's just practice?
That's just practice. It
Cool.
it's in my system somehow. You can use the light or the sticker or whatever you have on the platter, but to me it just when I scratch it a little bit, I get to know where my hand is positioned, like from this one, which sets you off a lot if you're re-triggering the cue point.
Cool.
Because that changes where it is on the platter and everything. So to me, I don't use these a lot when I'm in one of the samples that I want to use, but I navigate my way through it just through the platter. With the Oh My God sample, it could sound something like
Oh my God.
that's
Nice.
I think that's more.
Nice. Cool. That's cool.
So yeah, you have to be a little bit fast on the fader and know what you're doing because it's not much you have to do. It's just off, on, off, on. And to me, something like this sample instead. Then I want to cut it, go back to the beginning, open it, release it. And when I do that in the sample, I can create multiple sounds of the sound itself because I cut it up. So, and the same way and the same thing on the way back.
Nice. Now hold on. Okay, let's dive deeper into what you just did because that was a bit too fast for me.
Sure.
So on and off I get, but sort of you had this back and forward motion.
Yeah, that's again just practice. I'm pretty much pressing the fader to the right, to the closed position, because I want more of the sounds to be quiet than I want them to come through, basically.
Okay. So you have the fader off most of the time.
Yeah.
And then you have your thumb against it all the time, or just when you move it back to 0?
I'm adding a little bit of pressure there all the time because that's the point where I go from, so to speak. So this is my 0 and this is my 1, basically. So off and on, and I want it to be off more than on.
Yep.
And I want the cut in to be kind of precise on the beat, which helps me keep it on the beat like that.
So your thumb is always on the fader. You just release pressure or tension, I guess, from the fader, flick it on, and then sort of it almost springs back off.
Yeah, that's it. There's also another technique where you can hold your fingers like this, and you push the fader, and you push the fader like that. And to me, that's way less precise. They're just for my own taste. Because I have this empty room here when nothing happens, which puts me off just a little bit.
That's like a delay, it's sort of...
It becomes a delay, which is also used as an effect for some scratch DJs. But again, I'm not that advanced, so that's not my style to use that. Instead, I almost all the time add a little bit of pressure on the fader, and I do this.
So there's one cool thing I saw you do, which I think is called the crab scratch.
That's right.
All right.
That's right.
Tell us about that.
It's the same principle as just holding the thumb against the fader and open it, but you do it with more fingers than just one, because if you do this, it's hard to build up the speed. So instead I try to use 3 fingers, and I'm not very good at this. I'm doing it because I like how it sounds, and I'm trying to get better. But the principle is that you hold the fader like that with the thumb, then you hit it with 1 finger, 2 fingers, 3 fingers.
Gotcha.
First, second, and third one. In the beginning, it's easier to just do 2, so you have, but that creates 2 sounds because now it's no sound, 1 sound, off with the sound, on with a new one, and off with it again. So some people do it with like all of the 4 fingers, which I just can't. But doing this creates another level of the scratch parts.
Cool. Let's hear it first without audio in the background, and then we'll add that.
So. Like that. It's very, very quickly, but it's small, like chops of the sample.
Very nice.
If you're really good at this, you're able to control the speed of it. So you have the first one being like high pitched and the next one being lower, but then you have to be really concise with what you do.
Okay, so let's maybe try it with music. So these are the techniques that you use. Yeah, how do you wrap this all together, or any words about that?
No, what I think is important to think about when you do this is that even though there's always a right and a wrong way to do it, if you just do the most advanced things from the beginning to end, it might look and sound impressive, but maybe not as musical. So I think the important part here is to take these different techniques and make them your own and like find your way through them. Maybe use a little bit of this and a little bit of that and just combine that into what you do.
So as part of getting together with Accurate, I asked him to accept the challenge, which is to scratch on music which is in a completely different genre.
Right.
So I'm sorry for doing this to you.
No, this is just cool. Yeah.
Cool. So maybe you'll play us out with a sample or a beat that's not even a beat, and try and scratch on top of that. So I wanted to thank Accurate for joining me for this session.
I don't think it's possible to shed any of this.
And thank Native Instruments for getting us all together.
It's possible to shed any of this.
Hit like if this was useful. Check out Accurate's channel. There will be a link below.
Put something like this behind you.
Thanks for watching.
You can't really put something like this behind you. Like this behind you. I don't think it's possible. possible to shed any of this. Possible to shed any of this. I don't think it's possible to shed any of this. You can't really put something like this behind you. I don't think it's possible to shed any of this. I don't think it's possible to shed any of this. You can't really put something like this behind you. You can't really put something like this behind you. I don't think it's possible to shed any of this. You can't really put something like this behind you. I don't think it's possible to shed any of this. Shed any of this. Shed any of this. You can't really put something like this behind you.